I'm Nathan, and welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. Tonight starts with a load of laundry. Small thing, I know, but betrayal rarely announces itself with a slammed door. It shows up in the quiet logistics of a household. Who gets packed for, who gets cooked for, and who, at 12 years old, stands alone in a dark house at midnight, washing his own clothes because nobody else will. A father came home 2 days early from a work trip and found exactly that. A note on the refrigerator. A son, calm as you like, folding a shirt and looking up to say 8 words that turned the whole thing inside out. Watch for the difference tonight between anger and patience. Anger is loud and burns out fast. Patience is quiet, and it keeps receipts. This father had 5 days while the people who hurt his boy were out at sea, unreachable, sipping drinks they didn't pay for. 5 days is a long time in the hands of the right man. Dalton Creel could tell you whether a signature was real from across a table, and what a person was worth, not in dollars, in character, inside of 10 minutes. He was a certified estate and fine art appraiser, the man banks and probate courts called when someone died and left behind a house that might be junk, or might be a fortune. His mother had cleaned houses like those her whole life, a single mom with 2 jobs and 1 rule, repeated like a prayer: we don't take what isn't ours, baby, because a thing you steal never stops belonging to somebody else. Dalton built a career on that rule. Provenance, he liked to say, is just a story you can prove. His first wife, Celia, restored old jewelry by the window of their house on Tillman Street. Their son, Rory, was born quiet and precise. A boy who lined up his crayons by height and took apart the toaster at 7 just to rebuild it better. He was 10 when Celia died of illness. In her last week, she pressed her cameo locket, the one her grandmother carried through Ellis Island, into Dalton's hand and said, "This is Rory's someday. Tell him it points home, too." 6 months after the funeral, the locket vanished from her jewelry box. Dalton tore the house apart twice and never found it. Remember the locket, it matters. He met Annika Duval 2 years later. Polished, funny, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order the second time she saw you. She worked with her mother's company, Duval Estate Liquidations, the biggest estate sale outfit in the county. Her mother, Henrietta, was a fixture in 3 counties: church on Sundays, hospital auxiliary board, hugged widows at their own funerals, then sold everything the dead left behind. People called her a saint. Around her orbited a brother who drove the box truck, a sister who did the books, and cousins who showed up wherever she pointed. Dalton, a widower with a paid-off house and a lonely kid, never had a chance. He just didn't know yet that he'd been appraised. The wedding was small. The takeover was total. Henrietta sold her own farmhouse through her own company and moved into the in-law suite, bringing with her a locked oak cupboard wrapped in moving blankets like a coffin. Louis Quinzes, she told Dalton. Family pieces, sentimental. She kept the only key on a ribbon around her neck, and Dalton, a man who'd spent his life respecting other people's locks, let it be. That was the year the temperature started dropping for Rory. No single moment, just frost. Annika's warmth had a schedule, on when Dalton was home, off when he traveled. Rory's drawings came off the fridge to make room for cruise brochures. His chair at dinner migrated to a folding chair, then to a plate left on the counter. Henrietta talked about the boy in third person while he stood right there. The boy tracks mud. The boy is not strictly speaking family, is he? Whenever Dalton pushed back, the scene flipped before he finished his sentence. Annika cried on demand, asked how it felt to compete with a dead woman. Henrietta murmured that grief makes fathers see monsters where there are only growing pains. They were fluent in a grammar built to make a decent man doubt his own eyes, and his travel schedule did the rest. Rory learned to say, "I'm fine, Dad," in a voice engineered not to worry anyone. Kids do that. It's the bravest, saddest thing in the world. That October, Dalton took a 3-week cataloging job outside Charleston, his biggest fee of the year. Annika practically packed his bags. The whole family had been humming about something for weeks, conversations stopping when he entered rooms. He put it down to the Duvals being the Duvals and drove south. The job collapsed 19 days in. A legal dispute froze the estate, and the client paid him out and sent him home. Dalton didn't call ahead. 20 years of reading rooms told him the story he'd been given about his own house wouldn't survive an unannounced inspection. He drove 11 hours straight and turned onto Tillman Street just after midnight to find the house dark. Not asleep dark, empty dark. No cars, no porch light, just one thin blade of yellow under the basement door, and the sound of the dryer turning. His 12-year-old son stood at the folding table, working through a basket of his own laundry with the practiced motions of a boy who'd done this alone many times before. Rory looked up. "Dad, don't be mad. I was going to have it all put away before Sunday. Where is everyone?" "Cruise," Rory shrugged. "They left Tuesday. It's on the fridge." The note was in Henrietta's handwriting, confident loops, entitled Pressure, the script of a woman who's never once been told no. Held to the fridge by a Duval estate liquidations magnate, it read, "Took the family on a cruise. 5 days, Bahamas, my treat. The family earned it. There's money for pizza. The boy isn't invited. He's your mistake, not ours." Signed, like a queen would sign it. Dalton read it twice, aware of his own heartbeat, of 30 years of his mother's voice, and of something colder assembling itself behind his ribs. They'd left a 12-year-old alone for 5 days with pizza money and put it in writing, because it had never once occurred to them that Dalton Creel was anything more than the house they lived in. He folded the note along its crease and slid it into the pocket, where he kept his loop and his cotton gloves. That's when Rory, still folding, said it. "Dad, Grandma doesn't know I found something unbelievable in her cupboard. She keeps the key on her neck, but she left in a hurry, and the little door doesn't actually latch if you know where to press." Dalton followed his son down the hall. Rory pressed a knuckle into a carved rosette. The door slid open, and Dalton, exhausted, betrayed, his dead wife's ghost beside him, began, very slowly, to smile. The cupboard's top shelves were theater, hymnals, a china shepherdess, the props of a harmless grandmother. The lower compartment was a filing system. 9 accordion folders, each labeled with a surname and a year. Inside the first, a will, a power of attorney, a codicil. 3 different elderly signatures, all witnessed by the same 2 names, in what Dalton's trained eye read instantly, as one hand disguising itself twice. Under the folders sat a cigar box of rings, each tagged with a Duval lot number matched to a name and date. Trophies, inventoried like stock, because Henrietta had never met a thing she loved that she didn't also price. And third from the left, tagged and priced in that same neat hand, Celia's cameo locket. "That's Mom's, isn't it?" Rory said. "Why does Grandma have Mom's necklace?" Every wrong stroke of the last 3 years resolved at once. The courtship that had found him, the company that got first call on half the county's estates, the saint who hugged widows on Sunday and sold their houses on Monday. This wasn't a family secret. It was an operation, and by the grace of a cheap latch and one curious, unloved little boy, Dalton was holding it with 5 full days on the clock, while every player floated the Bahamas on a ship called the Coral Sovereign, certain they'd gotten away with everything. He put his arm around his son. "Buddy, you didn't do anything wrong, and you're not spending another night in this house alone." Then he took out his phone, photographed the note where it hung, and started making a list. He didn't touch the folders that night. An amateur grabs evidence and hands a defense attorney a case 6 months later. Dalton photographed the cupboard exactly as found, pressed the door flush, and made eggs at 1 in the morning while Rory finally talked. Really talked. Forgotten pickups, the birthday dinner rescheduled and never rebooked, Annika's voice changing the second the front door closed behind Dalton's car. The reason for the midnight laundry. Grandma says the boys' things don't share a drum with family. In the morning, he asked his Charleston client to say nothing about the job ending early. Then he called Priscilla Vang, who ran the Elder Justice Unit at the State Attorney General's office and had used him as an expert witness in 4 forgery prosecutions. He met her at a diner, slid his phone across the table, and talked for 40 minutes without raising his voice. Priscilla scrolled the photos twice. "Mr. Creel, do you know what the Swan matter is?" He didn't. Loretta Swan, an Austri widow, had her will changed in the last 4 months of her life, cutting out family for a caretaking friend nobody could locate afterward. The complaint had died for lack of evidence. Same shape as 2 other cases in other counties. Never connected because the dots were spread across jurisdictions, and the paperwork always held up. Dalton enlarged the witness signatures and gave her the sentence he'd given juries for 20 years. Paperwork holds up until someone who reads pressure and pen lift looks at it. Then it testifies for the other side. By 9 the next morning, a judge had signed the warrant. What the evidence team lifted out over 2 days redrew the map of 9 families' grief. The original, unforged wills kept like blackmail photos, ledgers linking lot tags to buyers, and a decades-old address book in which Henrietta had graded elderly clients like livestock. One page, headed Creel, was dated 14 months before Dalton ever met Annika. Appraiser, widower, house paid, license is the asset. Annika to work the sale. The boy is a complication. His marriage had a provenance too, and he'd missed it. Taped behind the cupboard's back panel was a fat envelope of texts and photos. Annika and a man at a marina bar, at a realtors conference, 3 years of messages. The man was Lyman Crow, the probate attorney whose name appeared as drafting counsel on every forged estate. The affair predated the wedding and simply continued through it, because that's what it always was, business. Crow drew the paper, Henrietta worked the widows, Annika worked the mark. And the mark of record, certifying Duval inventories for 3 years, was Dalton himself. He stood in the garage a long while that night. We'll let that stay between him and the garage. Then he came back inside, because there were 3 days left and a trap to build. The geometry was already beautiful. Everyone who could warn anyone was sealed on the same boat, posting sunset photos at $11 a minute while their cupboard was photographed page by page back home. Subpoenas went to banks that couldn't tip anyone off in time. Loretta Swan's daughter cried on a video call and overnighted her mother's handwriting samples. Chester Abernathy's grandson drove down with his grandfather's real will. And Lyman Crow, the one player still ashore, got handled with a con worthy of the Duvals. A fictional fat estate, a recommendation from Henrietta, a wired conference room. 40 minutes in, relaxed and fishing for the fee, he explained his own arrangement in the past tense, with names attached. When the agents introduced themselves, Crow looked at his phone and asked 4 words that summed up that crew's loyalty. What did Henrietta keep? He flipped before sundown. In exchange for a plea, Crow gave Priscilla the architecture, 9 estates over 11 years, roughly $2.4 million moved through sales, a 10th file, already open on a retired ferry captain named as Next Spring, and one detail that mattered more than all the rest to the man behind the glass. The Creel marriage had been planned like an acquisition, timetable and all. Year 3, a revised will was already drafted, moving Rory's inheritance and Dalton's death benefits under Annika's control. Henrietta as backup trustee. The boy was to be managed toward a boarding school the moment the ink dried. They had priced Rory too. That night Dalton sat on the end of his son's bed and told him the truth in plain words. Some of the people in this house did very bad things for money. They're going to answer for it. None of it was ever about anything you did. And the cupboard you weren't supposed to open is going to give 9 families their mothers and fathers back. Rory was quiet, then asked, "So the laundry thing is over?" "The laundry thing is over. From now on we do it together. Sundays, loud, in the middle of the day. Like we own the place," he added. "Because we do. We always did." The Coral Sovereign came up the Chesapeake on the morning of the 5th day in bright sunshine. The Duvals came down the gangway in matching family reunion t-shirts Henrietta had printed, sunburned, laden with duty-free rum, laughing. Henrietta was first, and so Henrietta was first to see the woman in the gray suit holding up credentials, flanked by investigators. Her soft face and church voice worked right up until the words, "Search warrant, Tillman Street, executed Tuesday." Her hand went, involuntarily, to the ribbon at her neck, to the key of a cupboard 200 miles away that was already empty. That gesture became a trial exhibit. Rory, years later, called it what it was, Grandma checking on her stuff. Annika was taken at the bottom of the gangway, scanning the crowd for someone who wasn't there. Rudy made it 30 yards toward a taxi rank, which became its own charge. Joel was crying before anyone reached her, and by Monday, her lawyer had called Priscilla. That's how bookkeepers survive. Dalton wasn't at the terminal. That Friday was a school day, and he'd promised Rory pancakes and a hardware store run. The two of them were rebuilding the latch on a certain cupboard door, for the next family, for the principle of the thing. The real revenge came over the following year, executed entirely inside the lines of the law. Dalton's testimony, pen pressure, pen lift, letter forms, walked the jury through 9 forged instruments, and the state's forensic examiner confirmed every call. Henrietta was convicted on 26 counts and sentenced to 22 years. The judge told her she'd run a harvest, not a business, mistaking other people's twilight for her own field. Annika took 8 years on a plea, and the marriage was annulled, not divorced, annulled, on grounds of fraudulent inducement. Crow was disbarred and served 30 months. Rudy and Joel drew lesser sentences, and civil forfeiture clawed every account into a restitution fund, split among 9 families, plus 1 retired ferry captain who got the strangest good news of his life. You were next, and you're safe now. The locket came home. On the morning of Rory's 13th birthday, Dalton placed it, cleaned, restrung, provenance now proven in a court of law, into his son's hands, and told him what Celia had said. It points home, too. Rory wears it inside his shirt on important days. The in-law suite became a workshop where a teenager takes apart clocks at a bench by the window, his mother's window. And Duval Estate Liquidation's client list was picked up at auction by an honest competitor who hired as their new authentication consultant of record, Dalton Creel. First thing he did was print a rule on every contract. We don't take what isn't ours, because a thing you steal never stops belonging to somebody else. Every con in this story ran on the same fuel, the certainty that decent people don't look. Henrietta hugged widows because grief doesn't audit. Annika married a man because loneliness doesn't ask for provenance. They left a 12-year-old alone with a cruel note because they were certain the man who'd swallowed everything else would swallow this too. What they missed is what people like them always miss. Quiet is not the same as blind. Dalton looked like a mark for 3 years because he loved his family more than he loved being right. The moment the evidence asked him to be right, he was ready, patient, and without mercy inside the lines of the law. You don't beat a predator by outshouting them. You beat them with documentation. Photograph the note. Keep the folder. Call the professional. And parents, watch the logistics. Nobody announces they're erasing a child. It shows up small. The chair at the end of the table. The plate on the counter. The laundry at midnight. A kid doing chores alone in the dark isn't independence. Sometimes it's evidence. Rory didn't save that family because he was clever, though he was. He saved it because one adult finally came home early enough to see him clearly. Be that adult. Come home early. Look in the basement. Take care of each other. Good night.